Welcome to this week's special episode of the Who the Folk podcast. I'm Lonnie Goldsmith, the editor of TC Jewfolk. With Election Day just days away, we thought it would be a great time to talk once again with Minnesota Secretary of State Steve Simon for a special PSA about the state of voting in Minnesota. We talk about what ways you can still vote, what the deadline to get your ballot postmarked is if you're going to mail it in, and how many voters we may see as Minnesota tries to keep its best-in-the-nation voter turnout rate on this week's Who the Folk podcast. Secretary of State Steve Simon, thank you. I appreciate getting to talk to you. So there's been a lot. The reason I wanted to talk to you, there's been so much made around election security, particularly with mail-in balloting over these past few days with court cases involving Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and sort of the shifting of goalposts of how votes are going to get counted. What's the sort of state of that in Minnesota, and can people still feel okay about mailing in their ballot at this point?
So you asked this at a very timely juncture, because as we sit here right now, we are 24 hours from an oral argument that happened in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Eighth Circuit yesterday.
Okay.
On this very question.
Oh.
So on this very question. So we're awaiting a ruling from the court. Minnesota law, as of right now, is that every Minnesotan has the opportunity to wait until Election Day to actually drop that mail in the mailbox. So it can be postmarked as of Tuesday, November 3rd, as long as it gets there on Tuesday, November 10th. That was a product of some litigation in state court earlier this summer, and that had been a set rule until early August, until this lawsuit came up trying to overturn it, trying to throw a wrench into it, trying to, as you say, move the goalposts just a few days before the election. But as of right now, the rule is you can wait until November 3rd, put it in the mailbox as long as it gets there by Tuesday, November 10th.
Okay.
So it all depends on the risk tolerance of every individual voter. So if a voter at this point thinks popping it in the mail will get it there by Tuesday, November 10th, not Tuesday, November 3rd, Tuesday, November 10th, then you should pop it in. If you're nervous about getting it there by that date, then you shouldn't. Then you could either hand deliver it, which you can always do, or have someone you know and trust, in most cases, hand deliver it, or you can vote in person absentee, meaning you can go into a county or city office anytime during business hours between now and Election Day and vote that way rather than in person on Election Day itself. Of course, that's always an option as well, which is ditch the whole absentee thing altogether and just go in on game day to your designated polling place.
Can you deliver your absentee ballot to your polling place on Election Day?
No, but you can deliver it somewhere else on Election Day. To your elections office in your county or city.
Okay.
But you shouldn't bring it to your polling place. You should bring it elsewhere if you want to deliver it that day, just not your actual polling place.
Okay. Because I know that the mail slowdown has been that's been a significant concern for a lot of people, to the point where I believe it was the Secretary of State, at least in Michigan, who said, don't send it. You cannot, based on the rules in Michigan, you can't trust that USPS will deliver it in time.
Yeah, and she said that very recently. And in that state now, they have to get it in by Election Day. Right. So I would say give yourself whatever your target date is to get it there, whether it's Election Day or some date further out, like a week from then. Mm-hmm. Maybe you give yourself, I would say, more than a week, not just 7 days. I would give yourself, to be safe, 10 days or so, which would mean if your target is to get it there by Election Day, I wouldn't pop it in the mail today either. Right. Keep in mind, you can always hand deliver it. Right. You can almost always have someone you know and trust deliver it for you. Then there's another option we haven't talked about, which is, and you don't want to, impose any sort of indirect poll tax, but it is true. Any voter could send it by mail and just pay the extra to get it their priority, or overnight even. I mean, that could happen.
Right.
Everyone has the means to do that, which is what makes that a little bit unfair, but that's not the fault of the voter who does have the means. But you can get it to the mail, more quickly if you pay more money.
And of course, the obvious concern, with putting it in the mail, so say somebody, puts it in the mail today, mm-hmm. and it shows up because of how mail is working. It could show up next Wednesday, next Thursday after the election.
Right.
But say the Eighth Circuit says, no, we're going to impose at this point that it had to be in by election day. You're
Right.
changing the rules for people who voted in good faith.
Yeah.
How could they do that?
I will tell you that was exactly our argument, or one of our arguments. We had several, but that was one of our arguments too. There's a principle in the federal courts that says the closer to election day you get, the less willing courts should be to change the rules, the well understood, well settled rules. And that's exactly what we argued. The time to have done this, if you were going to do it, would have been weeks and weeks ago, not now. It's throwing a hand grenade in the middle of, not in the middle of, at the end of an election, and we don't want that to happen. So we hope and expect that we'll get a good ruling there, but you never know. I mean, the moral of the story here is get your ballot in now.
Right.
Get it in as soon as you can. Or if you wish, you can reconsider and vote in person absentee or vote in person on election day itself.
I mean, I know I was unwilling to, take the chance even, I think, October 2nd. And I went to the MN Votes website and saw it was, logged right away. And yeah, it was the beginning of October. I was not willing to take that risk because that's a lot of risk.
Yeah, I mean, like anywhere else we might travel in our daily lives, whether it's Target or a grocery store or a pharmacy or whatever, there is some risk. Mm-hmm. And the beauty of voting from home or absentee is that's just one thing off of the list. It's not, nobody is saying, I'm not, the CDC is not, nobody is saying that polling places are a death trap, run for your lives. No one is saying that. But what we are all saying is, like any comparable place that you would go in a day where several hundred people would be circulating in the same space in a matter of a few hours, use your head. And part of you using your head is taking sort of measures that will minimize your risk up to and including not going there.
Right.
So, that's up to every individual voter. That's why we have this platter of options, really, in-person absentee, in-person on election day, or voting from home. So it's not for me to say what's right for any particular voter, but use it and do what you think is right for you.
So how many people have taken advantage of, and it's hard because when you see these stats for other states, they talk about, a lot of it is mail-in, and it's, here we have the option of either mail-in or in-person early. But in terms of numbers at this point, with less than with 6 days out, how close are we as a percentage to the previous presidential election in terms?
Yeah, we are right now at over half. Already over half. Let me give you the actual raw numbers,
please.
We had just shy of 3 million voters in 2016 vote in the presidential election in Minnesota, just shy.
Okay.
But let's round up for rounding's sake. We now have over 1.5 million people who have ordered an absentee ballot. And that was as of a few days ago. That data is a little bit stale. We'll have news to report tomorrow or the next day, and I think it'll be a pretty healthy uptick. If you add on to that the couple 100,000 or so voters who live in jurisdictions that automatically vote by mail, we have that in Minnesota. Now you're talking about north of 1.7 million. So almost certainly, even if we have a surge in turnout beyond what we've even been forecasting, you're talking about probably pretty reliably half or more than half of voters will have voted absentee. And that's a win-win. That was something that we had for in our office. That's why we were pushing this option or encouraging, let's say, people to take advantage of voting from home, because it's a win-win. The people who vote from home get the peace of mind of minimizing their own risk, but it's also a public service in the sense that everyone who votes from home this year is making or has already made the polling place just a little bit safer on election day by not being there. Meaning, if you average about 1,000 people per polling place, that's the average in Minnesota. Now 1,000 people will not be occupying that space in the course of election day. Now it'll be closer to 500. And just overall, that minimizes risk. Doesn't eliminate the risk, but it minimizes it. So it's good for everyone.
It's amazing when you break it down to the polling place, the averages of of what it usually sees and what one could see. When you put it at that level and that granular, it really does help understand it helps me at least understand the idea that so many more people aren't putting themselves or other people, and then as you build out their respective circles at risk. It's really, it's pretty remarkable when you think of it in those terms.
Right. It can have some real downstream effects.
Absolutely. I apologize for the barking dog.
Don't worry. Welcome to my world. We've got dog barks. We've got cat meows here. We've got all sorts.
Yes, and two kids who are doing school from home these days. So
Yes, same here.
Throwing it all in the mix. So it's remarkable. So you said that the data is going to get updated in the next day or two. How at what point can people not what's the cutoff date for requesting an absentee ballot?
Interestingly, there is no cutoff day. There is no day. So if someone wanted to order an absentee ballot to be mailed to their home the day before the election, I guess they could. That's not a particularly smart move.
Right.
Because even if it gets in the mail that day, it's not going to come to you. You get all that. Right. But there's no deadline. None. It's again up to every individual voter's tolerance for risk.
So I received my ballot. My wife and I received our ballots by mail. We filled them out, and again, instead of mailing them, we drove them to Plymouth City Hall, put them in the drop box there. Those are still considered mail-in ballots because we did it that way? Okay. Yep, now, if people voted in person early, is that considered
still absentee?
That is still considered absentee also?
Yep, absolutely. Okay. Yep. And by the way, interestingly, on election night, when all the totals will be released, there's no segregation or differentiation based on how you voted. In other words, there's no tally of, Trump did better among the group that voted in person absentee and Biden did better among the people who voted this way. No, they're all commingled. So at polls close at 8 p.m., there is no category anymore. A vote is a vote is a vote. And if it's in by that day, whether it was cast in person that day or cast in person that prior week or sent by mail, doesn't matter. Vote is a vote. It's all commingled.
Now, I know this is something that comes up, and again, this is one of those things where the rules are different in every state. When would my absentee ballot be counted? Because I know sometimes the first in are the last to be counted, and in some states, the first in are the first to be counted. So how does it work in Minnesota?
Well, in Minnesota, the rule is that starting 2 weeks before the election, which would have been Tuesday, October 20th.
Yes. Tuesday,
October 20th, that is the date where counties and cities who receive these ballots by mail can start feeding them into the machines. Okay. On a rolling basis with no particular order that I'm aware of in terms of first in, last out. It's just a pile, basically.
Yeah.
Priority given to any particular one. But starting 2 weeks before, that's when they can start processing. And that, from an administrative standpoint, I have to say, is really, really huge, that 2 week head start. That puts them in a really great place. There are states in this country, big states, swing states like Pennsylvania.
Yep.
According to their laws, they can't touch any of the mail that's come in. I mean, think of the mountains of mail in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, hundreds of thousands, millions. They can't start touching them until Election Day. In Minnesota, we got a 2 week head start. It's not just some sort of dorky administrative thing. It means something for everyone watching this, which is election night reporting, right? You want what's reported on election night to reflect as many of the ballots as possible. And because of this 2 week reporting period, what is reported on election night, it won't be 100%. We know that because we have a week after the election for some of them to start trickling in. But we do think that because of this 14-day head start, it's a massive advantage. It means that there will be a much fuller count on election night in Minnesota than there will be in other states.
Absolutely. So like when I start watching, and I will have many tabs to all of the races I have to watch that I'm concerned about for TC Folk. I'll be watching them. I've enlisted my 15-year-old to help me with them. We're all going to be watching stuff. When, shortly after 8 o'clock, as the results start coming in, because the cities have been able to feed those into the machines, there should be a decent sized pool of results that come in. Is that, or am I wrong on that?
No, by results, if you mean votes, there will be a lot of votes that come in because is posted that night. And as you probably know from following election nights, it's not right away, but at 10 o'clock or so, you got a lot in.
Yeah.
And so you're going to see every single vote that was cast that day will be reflected in the election night results that we post, as well as all or substantially all that have come in so far, either by mail or were cast in the prior days or weeks. Those will be in by that night. What will not be in are the ballots. How many of those will be, and it's hard to predict how many, that were postmarked as of November 3rd, but come in Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, up till the next Tuesday. I don't think that will be a massive percentage. I really don't. That hasn't been the experience in other states that have experimented with that approach. And so that's why I think we will have outcomes. We will have winners known early rather than late. They will be known in the vast majority of contests, I think, either on election night or shortly thereafter. Sure, the law of averages says that there will be a few somewhere in the state. Could be a local city council race, could be a bigger race than that. But there will be some that are awaiting the last day and the last hour and the last vote. Of course, that's just the law of averages.
Right.
But overall, I don't think that will be the case. The vast majority, we're going to know stuff. We're going to know winners earlier rather than later.
Well, that's good. And I know that this year, I mean, thank God I'm not in the, prediction business and the forecasting as those things happen. But fortunately, I mean, this year is going to be harder than ever to have something like that.
Right.
I'm not sure if I asked the question right or I don't remember the answer, so I'm going to try again. Is there like a percentage of early votes that have been requested that have been turned in?
So, yes, that have been turned in so far. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Numbers that we reported, and I'm rounding here a little bit.
Right.
Of the roughly 1.5 million requested, roughly 1.1 million were turned in. That was as of a couple of days.
Oh, okay.
Again, that's a rolling kind of total, but that's a pretty high percentage.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it is. People are voting particularly early this year.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, and again, I'm not going to ask you to forecast what that means, but I think there's,
right.
I mean, you watch the news same as me, and there's a certain level of enthusiasm for this year. So
definitely, no question, enthusiasm is off the charts. In fact, I think we might break the record for personal best here in Minnesota. We're not. I've never talked about bragging. We're number one in the country. Have been for the last two elections in a row. We were number one in 2016. We were number one in 2018. I think we stand a good chance of not only being, but possibly breaking our personal best in Minnesota. Or at least in recent history. The high for voter percentage in Minnesota was in 2008 when we were 77% of eligible voters voting.
Wow.
Yes, we could break that and even get up towards, dare I say, even cross the 80% threshold. It would be huge.
That would be amazing. I mean, and I know that, Minnesota's obviously, we're all very proud of Minnesota's strong voting turnout. So this is... But yeah, if it could eclipse 2008, and I thought that was 2008 was as crazy as I've ever seen a polling place before. Right. I got there early, like I'm an early morning voter, and it was Zachary Lane Elementary School in Plymouth was a zoo early. So
I believe it.
So I we'll see. I mean, with the number of votes that have come in and have been requested, I'd like to think that it bodes well for overall turnout. In terms of is this. Not sort of along the lines, but in terms of like election day security of polling places themselves, I know there's been a lot made lately about things like poll watchers, if you will. And I know this is something that Senator Klobuchar talked about. I talked with Governor Walz about a couple weeks ago. What's being done to make sure, to help assure people that if they've chosen to vote on election day itself, that it's going to be fine, that it's going to be safe. Yeah. You're not going to have this kind of electioneering, mishigas.
Yeah, mishigas is right. Two issues stand out to me in terms of election day polling place security and safety. One is the issue that you touched on, which is so-called poll watchers. In the first presidential debate, one of the candidates seemingly urged his supporters to, go to polling places to be a poll watcher, to challenge people's eligibility, to make things are going well. I can't speak for any other state, but I can tell you that Minnesota's law is very specific and contains some real limitations. So, for example, in Minnesota, every major political party gets one. only one, maximum of one person that they can designate in writing, by the way, at a polling place. That's it, one. You can't say a horde of 20 people or 50 can show up. They're going to be disappointed. One person. Once that person gets there, Minnesota law says they cannot come within 6 feet of a voter. They cannot talk to a voter. If they make a challenge to a voter's eligibility, it can only be in writing, and here's the key part, based on personal knowledge. Personal knowledge, that's the exact phrase in the law. So, for example, it would be okay for a challenger in Minnesota to say, wait a minute, I'm challenging her. I know her parents. She lives in my neighborhood. She's 17 years old. She's not even voting age. Right. That's okay. Or I'm challenging that guy over there. I recognize him at our block party a couple of years ago. He was showing everyone his Norwegian passport. He's not even American. Fine. What isn't fine is to make a challenge based on a hunch or a whim or a guess or a bad feeling or a question. So it's not okay to say, I just don't get a good feeling about her. Or I heard that guy speaking a language other than English in the hallway. I don't think he's a citizen. Not enough. That will be rejected on its face because it's not based on personal knowledge. It's a guess, and that's not good enough. So that's number one. The second security issue is one that's been in the news the last couple of weeks. There was a Washington Post story, followed up on by the Star Tribune, about a Tennessee employment agency that posted a job posting and for members, ex-military members, to go to Minnesota for a paid job to guard polling places. Well, first of all, that's been put to bed now, okay? I was on the phone immediately with the Attorney General's office, with state and local and federal law enforcement, and now there's a legal agreement in place, and that's not going to happen anymore in that particular episode. But more broadly, just zooming out for a minute beyond that particular episode, we have a clear rule, again, in Minnesota law. No one who's not supposed to be there can be within 100 feet of the entrance of a polling place. So anyone who thinks that on election day in Minnesota, they're going to show up and help law enforcement or support law enforcement or supplement law enforcement. First of all, they don't want or need your supplementation or help. Secondly, you can't come within 100 feet of the entrance of that polling place. Now, the question arises, what if they come 101 feet within the polling place and they have a semi-automatic weapon slung over their shoulder? Well, there we have really strong laws, state and federal, against voter intimidation. And I know that the chiefs of police, sheriffs, and others are on guard for that possibility. That said, though you have to always plan for the worst and hope for the best, I don't foresee that that's going to be a problem in Minnesota. It traditionally has not. Voters don't like it. Local law enforcement don't like it. So I think it's certainly possible, but I'm really optimistic that we're not going to have that kind of outside private security, quote unquote help for law enforcement.
I got to imagine that it doesn't actually make law enforcement's job any easier.
Makes it harder. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
Sheriffs say that. The police chiefs say that. The Commissioner of Public Safety of Minnesota, who's great, by the way, he says that. You're not helping. So there are other ways to help your candidate. Go pound lawn signs, make phone calls, but don't just show up the polling place, either because you think you're going to be a poll watcher. You won't, unless you're the one designated person by a political party. And as for helping law enforcement, they're fine without your help. Thank you.
Well, excellent. Well, I guess this is your Super Bowl coming up.
It's the Super Bowl and the World Series combined, I would say. Yeah.
Well, it sounds, knock on wood, everything seems to be going well, but obviously this will be a very interesting stretch run in these last few days and into next week, waiting results. But Secretary Simon, thank you so much again for chatting with me about this, and best of luck on Tuesday.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Of course. Take care. The Who the Folk podcast is part of the Jewfolk Podcast Network, a product of Jewfolk Inc. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you have suggestions for other podcast guests, please email them to me at editor@tcjewfolk.com. For our other shows, check out tcjewfolk.com/podcast.